Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm LP.
And I'm Will. Oh, I'm doing the intro.
Yes,
okay,
you're doing
so
it.
Usually it's Marshall. This is great. So hi, everyone. Welcome this evening. We have my friend C.S. Malerich here to discuss her book, The Factory Witches of Lowell. Welcome, Charlotte.
Ooh.
Hey, welcome. I'm so happy to be here. It's really nice to talk to all of you.
I'm so excited that we actually get to talk about your novella from Tor, which came out in 2020, right?
It did. Yeah.
Yeah, during the apocalypse. And I know, and we'll get into this later, but I know with everything going on in publishing during the apocalypse, maybe some things didn't get as highlighted as good as they should be. So I've been wanting to do this interview since the book came out. So I'm so excited we finally got to meet our schedules and have a really good time. So we asked this next question to all of our guests, and it always throws them off, even if they're expecting it. I just want you to describe writing The Factory Witches of Lowell in 3 words that could be completely unrelated. What comes to mind?
Accidental, necessary, and friends. Yeah.
Oh.
Amazing. All right. So we're going to kind of unpack those words. So accidental. Talk to me about, that word.
The Factory Witches of Lowell kind of came out of me thinking about a magical system for a novel that I was writing, and that would be set kind of contemporary universe. And I wanted to go back and see what this magic system looked like in history. And I kind of had been playing with it in my head a lot. It's the labor of theory of value, just in a magical form. And so I was like, well, I need to kind of show this in some sort of early capitalist labor struggle. What struggles would there be? Where would it be set? What kind of industry? What kind of workers? What would they be doing? How would this play out? And I didn't really feel the need to actually sit down and write it until I saw a call for an anthology called Long Hidden. Sitting on my shelf, and they were asking for writers to do historical fantasy from perspectives that often didn't get highlighted, whether that was a racial minority or an ethnic minority or just from a working class perspective. So that kind of stuck on my head. Someone else who was in my writing group was working on a story for the same anthology, and I thought, hey, why not? Let me try this. And that's when I started writing it, and actually decided, hey, this is the labor struggle that I'm going to use. It's going to be set in Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm going to write about these badass young women going on strike. And it was not a short story at all. It was not done by the time the anthology deadline was passed. And it was a way bigger story than I could fit into 7,500 words. So I kind of kept it in my back pocket and worked on it from time to time. And then finally finished a draft of it and gave it to my writing group, and then didn't do anything with it for a while, and went to a writing workshop. And brought it out there, and then finally said, all right, I think I know where I want this to go. And Tor just happened to have a call for open submissions coming up, so I threw it out into the ether, and very, very fortunately, Carl Engle-Laird liked it and asked me if I wanted to publish with them. So I did.
That's
awesome.
amazing. So with that being said, will you give us a little pitch to tell our listeners, like describe the Factory Witches of Lowell?
So the Factory Witches of Lowell is a historical fantasy about a real strike among the textile workers in the 1830s in Lowell, Massachusetts, but with some extra magic and witchcraft added in, so that the union is actually more successful than they were in real life. Yeah, that's Factory Witches of Lowell.
That's
so
awesome.
Let's talk about the next word then, necessary. Why did that word come to mind?
I am someone who has been supportive of workplace organizing for a long time, and really feels that that's where our power is as working class people. And I was ideologically wed to that idea quite early on in my life, but hadn't actually seen it or experienced it for myself. Just knew it kind of on a theoretical level. And I enjoyed playing with that idea a lot in my fiction and fantasy that I was writing. And by the time I actually sat down to write it, I think I had really come to understand and believe that we needed a pop culture that made workplace organizing more normal, and just something that people did, because I wasn't really seeing a lot of those stories. And I realized that that might be part of what was holding me back as a worker myself. And so it kind of all came together in that in 2020, the year that this book was going to be coming out, was the opportunity that in the state where I live, the law changed for public sector workers, which I am. And I then had the opportunity to start organizing at my workplace. Though it in a weird way, I had kind of written myself the story that I wanted to live, and I had written about a workplace of people who didn't always get along, but were quite close and had each other's backs ultimately. And I think by living through that in a fantasy world, it made it easier and realer for me to live it in my actual life. I remember a coworker saying to me, like, when I started talking about unions and stuff on the job, she's like, this is like a thing that you've just been waiting to do, haven't you? Like, this is a thing that like you've been preparing for a long time. And I was like, yeah, I think it is. I have this book coming out. And I think that's the thing. That's the thing that maybe, it may not the only thing, but the one thing that like pushed me over the edge and was like, hey, like you just got to do this and you just got to make this part of your life. So that's kind of what I mean when I say necessary. And I think it also, I'm not unique in that, like, a lot of people have been kind of feeling powerless for a long time and looking for ways to be activists and looking for ways to be effective activists. And I think that the kind of explosion of organizing and talking about unions, like what's going on at Amazon and Starbucks that we've seen in the last couple of years, it's not an accident. And it's not an accident that this is the time when, like, I had this story ready to go. So, yeah, I think that's just kind of like the period of history that we're in. And it's exciting. It's an exciting place to be.
I'm going to ask you a couple more questions to some of the points you've made already, but I want to go to the last word that you said to describe the book, writing it, and it was friends. So why'd that come up?
I could not have done this without the kindness of a lot of friends along the way, who gave me the space to write and the respect to take the time and the energy to write when maybe it would have been more fun or more rewarding for them to have me doing something else. The friend that had gotten me into that writing group, who wrote the story that eventually went into Long Hidden, was incredibly important. Another member of that writing group was incredibly important because he was the one that read it and said, like, this is a romance. These two characters, they're in love with each other. They're so in love with each other, and you just have to write them that way. And that was one of the things that made it click for me. And just the kind of the friendships that I've had with other people on the job. I've never worked in a textile factory in the 1830s. So I have to take something from my real life, like my actual relationships with coworkers, to put it into the way that these coworkers are interacting in the story. And I think I imagined a lot of it from, it's a really well historically documented period. So I imagined a lot of it from the sources that I had, but also just from working in a place where there are a lot of women, a lot of femme people, a lot of people who care about each other and tease each other and get really involved in each other's lives in a way that maybe seems inappropriate to Pam Beasley on The Office, or or what we imagine a workplace should be like on a professional level. But yeah, I think that's why friends are really important to getting this book out.
Can you share what you actually do besides your writing life? Like what your main job is?
I work in a library. I'm a library assistant. So I move books all day and I talk to people about books all day.
Saint.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
You are doing the Lord's work, the universe's work.
The Lord. We don't talk about the Lord. We talk about Lord Disa doing Lord Disa's work. God bless
exactly. So I want to ask about even I love what you said about you were writing this and it was about, and that person said, you've been waiting for something like this and, in your real job. And I felt like that was the magic in and of itself, because it was all about manifestation. Right. But I want to talk about a union, and I'll tell you why I love your writing. Me and Charlotte went to a workshop together. So that's how we know each other. And I've always loved your writing. And so I was so excited when this book came out. But specifically for me, it was an even deeper connection. And I want to ask this question first before I tell my little story that I want to share with you. I've been meaning to tell you this for the past couple years, but I wanted to make sure we're doing it in it, sort of in person. For the unions, did you grow up in a very union oriented family where they talked about these issues? Or was it more of something when you were growing up in more of an adult world that you started thinking about the power of people, the power of togetherness to make things have equanimity in life?
I didn't grow up in a family that talked about unions at all. I only just recently, in the last couple of years, learned that my dad was in a union because I had started organizing at my job, and he was like, oh yeah, that was a good thing for me. I think I first became aware of unions in history class as probably a freshman in high school. And it wasn't something that ever seemed or was presented as relevant to today. I grew up in a pre 9/11 world where, and I kind of lived in a bit of a nice, happy suburban bubble. where I kind of imagined and was also encouraged to imagine that all the problems of the world had been solved, and that social injustices didn't really happen anymore. So it really wasn't until I was in college that I kind of got the shit kicked out of my innocence and realized that that just wasn't the case, and started thinking more seriously about the way things are set up in our society. I mean, I think that contributed to like my desire to create a story that was missing for me.
Yeah. So for me, the reason I really gravitated to the story. So when I was a kid, my dad was in the union for what turned into be Verizon. And it was Bell Telephone at the time, right? And my dad used to take me to these union marches, and he became the president of his union. And this, I must have been in like first or second grade when I started going to these marches. And my dad would like explain to me about like why he needed to be in a union and what happens when people have too much power. And he would really, my parents weren't always the best, but there's certain things they did really good. And this was one of them. And then I'll never forget being at a strike thing where they're like marching and we have like banners and everything. And my dad gets arrested by the cops. And like in my neighborhood, we did not have a good relationship with the cops, but this was outside my neighborhood. So I thought automatically when the cops were taking my dad that they were going to kill him. Truly, this is what I thought. And I burst into tears. Right. And because, they were, there. And luckily the officers actually were really kind. And they're like, your dad's not going to go to jail. Like this is part of the thing. He did wind up going to jail. So he lied, but it was like to be there for an interim, right? Because they were, blocking things or whatever. So when the book came out, so my dad has Alzheimer's. And when the book came out, I started reading the book to him over the phone. Because my dad is just, it's like one of the things that he goes to is constantly, these stories about the union. And he would always bring up about how he went to the union. And so I read it to him, during when it came out, during the apocalypse. And this is still, and he hasn't really been able to read. He thinks he's reading, but he's like rereading the same thing. So I was like, I'm going to read this to him when I'm on the phone with him. He still asks about the book.
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, that's amazing.
So it's like one of the things that like I'm amazed. And I think part of that was about, the connection of him being in the union. And I think also like, my dad was equally like liberal in a way, but then not. And so I think he also has been going through like kind of a recognition of how he was not forward thinking specifically with his daughters, with my sisters. And I think when he was like talking about this, he started telling us stories about like other women in the union and like what they went through. And then how he even thought like he never would read like women writers before. Right. And it wasn't until we grew up reading women who wrote did he start like rethinking those things and rethinking of those ways of what was progressive. And I'm also bringing this up because of the one character that you have in here, and his name, I want to say Boot, right? Booth? Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Boot. Boot. Yeah, Boot. Sorry, I couldn't see. How when we are introduced to this character, he thinks these women are getting a great living. They're moving forward. They want to parade them upon these Boston gentlemen of saying, this could be your daughter too. And it's so backwards. It is so, well, we're going to give you an inch and we're going to act like it's acres. So when you were creating this character, was this like a hard reach for you? Do you feel like it was really easy to create a character like that?
Yeah, Mr. Boot. So he's a real person. And So I had a little bit of like kind of historical documentation of what kind of person he was to go on. But yeah, I love to write liberal villains, like the characters who think like, I am so wonderful and magnanimous, and I have given you such a great shot. How could you possibly want more or want to make decisions for yourself when I'm doing such a good job for you? And that, I mean, I think that's a character type that's always kind of resonated with me. That like paternalism, and it often manifests like in a very sexist way in reality and in fiction, and it felt like that was just the way this character had to be written for the conflict that was central to the story.
I mean, I really think, and then Marshall, you can go because I saw you had your hand up. I really felt like, and there's going to be spoilers in here, everyone. So if you're listening, y'all just need to read the book. I really felt like even when the story ended, I still feel like he still felt like I don't get it. I really gave these, these women a lot. And you're just like, dude, like, what are you, like, what is going on? And it reminds me of like, like all the toxic masculine people in our media, like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, they think they give you the world, and you're just like, you're barely giving me, quote unquote, giving me anything. I'm making you money, and you're still not paying me. Marshall, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Okay, so a lot of this spoke to me in that I'm a teacher in a public school, and I work next door to the library at the school, which I love that you're working in a library. But I find that the union thing is really, really interesting. I don't know exactly where I want to go with this question, but I'm going to circle back to something Will said a second ago about the boot character. I find like we've had admin like that, where, looking at the teachers when our morale is low and when we're not getting paid enough, when we're working long hours, and being like, what do you mean I'm giving you all of this, right? I'm curious, and I love that. So I'm assuming that you helped get the union started where you are. Am I assuming correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So me coming into this union that's already been established, the amount of times, how many years it takes for things to happen, because we're up against characters like this. And I think, and I think what Will's story and your story doing this is, I think, really, it really spoke to me. And so I guess what I'm asking is, have you seen what you were hoping to see in the unions that are happening? You know what I mean? That you brought up Amazon, you brought up these big companies and stuff like that. Is the shift as glacial as I feel in my union, or is it actually shifting, I guess is the question. Maybe that's a big question, but
it's maddeningly slow.
Yeah.
It's really, really maddeningly slow. If I had known in 2020 that like I was going to, we were going to be at the point where we are right now in 2023, I probably would have been like, I don't know if I really need to spend that time doing this. So it's really slow. I have a lot of thoughts about why that is. And some of it has to do with the way that mainstream unions have really been neutered over the past 70 years, and shifted away from more militant and more direct action, and more just admitting that working class people have different interests than the managerial class. We just do. And it's not that they're evil, and it's not that we're pure and good. it's that we live in a system that has emergent properties, right? Like we have different interests, and so we're going to be asking for different things. So if you know, and it's really hard for my coworkers to say anything negative about their direct supervisor, or to take any kind of controversial or confrontational stand, because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Like it just genuinely comes from a place of, I want to get along with everyone. And shying away from discomfort. Even if it actually means that you are going to be more uncomfortable because you can't pay the rent, or you don't know if your partner is going to be covered by your insurance next week, but you feel so uncomfortable asking or bringing this up that you'd rather not. And it really bothers me, like that we've kind of gotten to a point where we're so craven and cowed that way. Yeah. So, I mean, I would say no. I haven't seen the change that I want to see, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it could get better. Yeah. Marshall, I talk to a lot of teachers, and I part of what keeps me sane is I talk to a lot of people who are organizing at their own workplaces who don't work with me, and we kind of compare notes. Oh, nice. And it's really amazing to see, because I think teachers have like such a hard job. Like it's emotionally exhausting and you're on all day. And yet there are folks like who do that all day and still come home and have a conversation with me about organizing and make plans to like talk to their coworkers, and like, I'm going to talk to this person at lunch tomorrow. I'm going to catch this person on recess, and we're going to figure it out. So it really is like quite amazing. And I think that the only real way to do that is kind of what you were saying, Will, is just having that group of people who are supporting each other so much, and that community. And that's probably what your dad felt. Mm-hmm. And what, you know, what's still in there for him and what's resonating with him. I will say, like, the more that I do this, the more that I see like Mr. Boot is not an unusual character. Like, this is just like, so it's almost formulaic, the way that the administrators behave. Like, they feel so offended and personally offended when you let them know that things are not all okay. Things are not equitable. And, you know, it's like, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but that's just not the case.
And I know the feeling of feeling bad, almost bringing it to their attention too sometimes, because you're just like, look, I'm here, I'm doing my job, but like this and this isn't working. And just to have that face, like, see that reflected exact thing. It's just like, I cannot believe that this is what you're saying. I thought I'm killing it. I'm doing a great job. Right. And it's like, just let me just tell you about a couple of things. So, well, best of luck, honestly. I know my union reps at my school they work all the time, you know, outside of school hours, and just trying to get the best, you know, negotiations and stuff that they can. And it's a lot of extra time and effort. It's not easy. So anyway.
Y'all are speaking Tagalog to me, because I feel like all I do, the reason why my management hates me is because I'm constantly telling them where they're falling short. Because if I don't tell them where they're falling short, then I have an experience where they're constantly asking for more while doing less. And I'm like, you can't expect me to work at a high level and you to manage at a medium level or a low level. And that's one of those things that, like, there will be mandates from on high, from upper management, and then they're transmitted through middle management, and the lower management is like, yeah, just make it happen. I was like, no, you're the person who's supposed to figure out how to implement this. It's definitely not supposed to be me. as like boots on the ground. So in those ways, I was like, I don't know, fuck your feelings. I don't care about how you feel.
Mm.
Like, you have a job to do, just like I have a job to do. And if I don't do my job well, I have to get counseled. I get a warning. I'll get written up. So when you're not doing your job well, what am I supposed to do? Because I'm not doing this with you.
You know, I think it's really interesting too, and I think, Charlotte, you touch upon this about the book, about, you know, the way capitalism works. Boot is worried about his bosses and about his way of life, and he even mentions in the book about, well, I deserve this house, just like, you know, the upper management deserves like a really beautiful house. But he's also, you know, in service to his employees, even though he doesn't see it that way. He feels like, I'm giving you so much already. And I feel like we see this, you know, in our own society is, you know, people want to feel powerful and in charge and that they're above someone, you know, and I think that is just like what capitalism has created. And this is why we have to, as society, move beyond it. There has to be something better. And I think whenever you say that, people automatically like, well, socialism doesn't work. No one said socialism, everyone. Everyone said there has to be something better. We've gone through so many wonderful things as human beings, like the things that we've been innovative and creative. Like, we have to look beyond, you know? And I feel like the book, what you did really good is see that perspective from, you know, the villain of, you know, his thoughts, but also the struggles of the women. And I'm really thinking of like Abigail specifically. Like, she was so worried for her family that she was ready to cross that line, you know, even though in her heart she didn't want to let down her friends. And you know, and I feel like they're more like sisters because they're bonded through this experience, not just through just a spell, but they're like really bonded. So I want to kind of like, let's go back now to like Hannah and Judith, who are kind of like the core of their stories, because I feel like what you did so great in the story is you showed two different kinds of strength, right?
Mhm.
Like, Hannah is, deeply ill because of the work that she does. She infuses it with magic and she's suffering. You know, she isn't able to do as much as the other women. And then we have Judith, who is kind of like I identify with her, is like kind of like a bull in a china shop, but sometimes she doesn't even realize like how strong she is. So can you talk about what was it like developing those two characters? Was it something that was more instinctual as the story was flowing? Or were you thinking like, I kind of need these two contrasting women to fuel this story?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, Will. I think about different kinds of strength and different kinds of courage and different kinds of heroism a lot. And it really, yeah, it takes all kinds to make a movement work, right? And from what I've seen, is, yeah, you need the leader who is like Judith, who is just full steam ahead and damn the consequences. And that is LP, right? I don't care, manager, like what, how, I don't care about your feelings. I'm going to tell you the truth. This is what we need. But that also can have its own way of like alienating the leader from the other folks who are in the movement with them, and being too abrasive and maybe asking too much, or more than other people are willing to give. So, I mean, it's really quite consequential for people to make the decision to go on strike. And it can mean putting your family in danger and jeopardy. It can mean actually like putting your life on the line. So without getting like too melodramatic. I wanted to really have that be part of the story and like have the characters have to grapple with, well, what do you do when someone is like, I don't want to be on strike anymore. Or like the cost, I thought I was with you in this, but the cost has just become too high. And I think you need that, that sense of humanity and how human beings work and ability to forgive and maybe make some concessions or to bridge some gaps that Hannah brings. And because she's not 100% sure at the beginning, and Judith is really pushing her a lot. And it's in very positive ways, but it's also, Hannah needs to find where she has to take a stand for herself too, right? Where she has to be able to tell Judith no, and sometimes that's on behalf of her coworkers too. Like you're asking too much.
It also makes me think too of right now it's January, everyone, and HarperCollins union is still on strike. And it really, I was rereading it for our interview. And so it really made me think about, what's going on with them right now, and how hard it must be for them to not get the things that they're deserved, and how hard it must be because they're going, I think, on day like 52, maybe, of the strike. And there's been no talks whatsoever. So I just thought this was just rereading the book. I just can imagine, like, you understand how Abigail, does say, I can't do this. I got letters from my family. I will go back for that an extra nickel, right? Like, it's like how these assistant editors are living in New York, making $40,000 a year, and they're literally asking for $5,000 more as a raise. $5,000, right? It's $1 million raise all across the board when they've made double regular, like triple the profits, So to me, that was just really interesting. It was just like, a great correlation of also what's happening now. Like this is also based on, an actual union that happened in Lowell. And yet here we are, like 200 years later, still going through the same thing. And it's showing that freedom is just never ever going to be given. We are constantly going to have to push from the greed of a few. Go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just wondering, you had said something earlier about the romance between the two characters, and I was wondering, so the way I heard it, it sounded like that wasn't your intent to start off with. Or can you talk about that? Because maybe I misheard you, but yeah. But you said somebody told you there was a romance there, and you're like, oh, there is.
Yeah, I think my original draft, it was much more like ambiguous. These are two friends, or are they really like in love with each other? And I don't want to say it was not my intention to write it as a romance, but I think I was looking for permission to write it as a romance. Because I'm reading about like the circumstances that these young women lived in, right? They're sleeping in the same bed. They have like, their lives are so intimately connected. And I think that was actually part of what drew me into the setting too, was just thinking about how close they were. But I was like, almost like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if this needs to be a romance or not, or like, should it be? Is that too cheesy? Is that like, is that trying to bring like a look at me being progressive thing to it? that there's a female romance. And I, do I even want that to be the focus of the story? And yet, like, I couldn't help, I think in that initial draft, I couldn't help writing it like with those feelings, just bubbling up under the surface. And so, so when one of my critique partners was like, yeah, this is a romance, you should just write it that way, I was like, oh, thank God. Like, yes, I can write this as a romance. And it's fantastic.
That's great.
And it actually like forced me to go back and do a little bit more like historical research and like, okay, so like, how am I going to do this in a way that doesn't just make half the readers like put it down as like this, I can't accept this in this setting, the way that it is written. And, historically, there are lots of female-female relationships. And there really isn't anything that weird or unusual about the way that I was writing these two characters. And so, at the end, I was just like, I can't imagine Judith and Hannah not being a couple at the end. And they're just, I have a whole headcanon about like their lives afterwards. And they're they're going to be together forever.
Wow.
They're just meant to be together. And I was really happy to write the story that way. I do really like romance. I do really like love stories. So it was just a nice treat for me.
Go ahead,
LP.
Yeah, you talked about how this was kind of a thought experiment for a magic system you built and you wanted to see how it would work historically. I'm curious about the genesis of the magic system and what happened to the initial story that you were writing.
So it that novel is the turd that I polish like forever and ever, and just revise and revise and revise. One day, maybe I will actually have a version of it that I like. So the magic system, I was kind of, I was writing this like urban fantasy novel and I wanted to have unions in it, even though it wasn't going to be the focus, and radicals and organizers. And so I was thinking about how to incorporate magic into what they were doing. And of course, it was an urban fantasy. There was going to be a big evil corporation that was doing something nasty with magic. So that I wanted to like kind of go back and really like weave the way that the magic was working into the form of production that existed. And like a lot of classical fantasy is very like feudalism based. If you think about it, like there's this class of people who are like the nobles who are gifted with magic and they just are able to do magic, like the wizards. And I wanted to have a form of magic that was like a little bit more democratized. And I think you see that a lot more in like urban fantasy, the idea that someone can just like study witchcraft and then, they can use it. So I was playing with that, but then also playing with the idea of like, we have to have class consciousness too. It's not just, anybody gets to go to school and learn how to do this. There's still a class of people who are monopolizing the magic in that way and the power that comes of it. And a class of people who are being robbed of their ability and their raw natural talents that they're born with. So then I wanted to really like examine it in a very closed system, which I was able to do with the Factory Witches of Lowell. So maybe one day that novel will see the light of day. I hope so. I also hope that like one day I'll write other stories in in this kind of universe, this alternative history universe. And so we can see magic playing out in other places and industries.
Well, I love that you
Follow-up
said that.
is not a follow-up. I'm not done. A follow-up that is...
Raise your hand. Use that hand button.
I had already... She just finished answering my question. Just give me a second. So thank you so much. So we've seen the Tor, novella to novel pipeline. How has this novella built or affected your relationship with Tor? Like, I know that it started your relationship with Tor, but has that grown at all due to the novella coming out?
It has not.
Okay.
And I will take full responsibility for that, because I developed a very bad case of writer's block and didn't do anything for about 2 years. But on the other hand, like, it's a two-way street. Tor hasn't come knocking at my door. So
I'm like, never take full responsibility for anything. There's a corporation involved.
Yeah.
This is good advice.
Yeah, Charlotte, that isn't, I don't think that's your fault at
writer's
all.
block. Yeah.
At all. Well, I want to go back to one of the characters we haven't talked about yet, but still played an integral part of the story, which was Mrs. Hansen. I found her really great because it's is she going to turn them in? Is she not going to turn them in? I felt I don't know, can we trust her? And she was what I felt about her character is that she was the mother of them. And I think she herself was questioning, are these women going to be able to do this? Am I going to see these women succeeded where my generation didn't? And so it's she was weighing in her opportunities of what was happening. Is that how you wanted it to be expressed through her? Or talk to me about that character.
Yeah, she was really interesting and fun to write because I wanted to have a female character from a different generation who would be part of this story and so would have a different perspective on things. And I really didn't know what she was going to do either. I wasn't sure if she was going to come down fully on their side or not, or she was going to betray them at the end. And I think part of that was because, sometimes when you see somebody a younger person particularly able to do something that you weren't able to do, there's a jealousy and a perversity that comes out and you're like, I just want to slap this person down because how dare they get the leg up that I didn't get. And I felt all the bitterness that Mrs. Hansen feels, because she's got a tough life too. And in a way, these boarding house matrons, they were in a similar position to the textile workers in that now, as single women, they were able to have a job and it was a fairly good income and some stability in their lives. And yet there wasn't a whole lot of control. And they didn't have the benefit of having a union or having a group get together and stand up for them. So I could see her loyalties going in any direction almost. And I also just kind of liked writing her too, because she's not a teenager and she could see things that none of the teenage characters would, be able to name right away. And I also wanted a character who maybe had a connection to an older kind of magic. For anyone who's super interested in the intersection of witchcraft and capitalism, please read Fiyah Federici, the Caliban and the Witch, because she explains why witch hunting became such a popular thing in the 1600s, just as feudalism is transitioning into capitalism, and the autonomy that a lot of primarily women were experiencing, like at home in their own homes, being able to do kitchen magic, putting herbs together, doing basic doctoring, that had to go away in order for things to become professionalized and for enough workers to be urbanized into factories, and for capitalism to emerge. And so there's like a very strong connection between the persecution of women who have some sort of perceived power in their community, and this like new world order. So that was really thematic in the novel that I was writing. So I wanted to bring that in a little bit too. And Mrs. Hanson was kind of the one that could do it because she would have the memory. And yeah, it's just always nice to have like an older mentor character.
I think what you said too about just the actual idea of having Mrs. Hanson in there, it's just that, of her going through of saying, is this, I didn't have this, and so now you're going to have it, and having that bitter. I feel like we're having that conversation now with easy way, student loans. When you hear people say, well, I paid off my student loans. Well, good. Well, maybe you should have fought to not have student loans. Maybe you should have fought that all universities should be free, that we're living in a world where it's just as important to go to college as it was 50 years ago to go to high school. Like it should be free. And it also reminded me a couple things of like some of the older generation of gay men, who I've talked to, who said, these kids, talking specifically about, even my generation, but we'll say Gen Z, they don't know how good they have it. And, like trying to basically be like they're spoiled or entitled. And I said, me and Brent, who isn't here today, talk about this a lot. I don't want them to go through what we went through. I don't want it to be a further thought that they can bring someone to their prom. I don't want them to think that they can't be themselves in middle school or high school. No, isn't that why we pushed for what we pushed? And like, yes, do I want them to understand history? I do. But at the same point, it's like, not all of our history was based in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what's so great about this upcoming generation is they're going to be able to see all facets of the pain and persecution that went through, but also the joy of it, and that they can have whatever type of life they want. If they want to be polyamorous, if they want to be like, monogamous, if they want kids, if they don't want kids, that every single thing is just allowed to them because they're human beings and worthy. And that's what I love about that character, Mrs. Hanson, is that, yes, she was bordering, but in the end, it's like, she was like, no, she wanted them to have it better than they did. So I just want to read, there's one last question I have before we then go to our final question. And I just want to read this one section, and it's at the end. So again, everyone, if you didn't read the book, we'll stop here and go. Appleton turned to the Lawrences, proposing to resume their ad hoc conference. Gentlemen, he spoke, as the chorus of retoot, re-umpity chased away the boots coach. What do you know of conjuring? All right. So I just want to be like, I know maybe you've been going through some writer's block, but I just see a sequel, maybe a trilogy, okay, going on, because I'm just like, oh, what is going on? I just see like them battling it out, So was that a thought in your head when you wrote that scene? Is that something you would like to do?
Yeah. I was trying to set the stage for like what further developments there are going to be, and how are the capitalists going to take back the magic? Because, oh shoot, like these workers have figured out how they can use just their natural witchcraft to take control over the machines and the factories. Like, this is not good, man. Like, this would upset all of human history from 1830 on. So I have some thoughts about that, and then how it was going to eventually play out in kind of like modern times. I guess I don't want to say too much in case I actually do write it at some point, but that's where I want it to go. And also, I hate these guys. Like, these are real people, and I hate them. I hate them so much.
I love this. I love the anger coming out. So, well, I hope you write it. I'm ready to beta read whenever you want. Okay. Or just be a cheerleader, you know? So our final question is always, you know, like, what keeps you writing? Like, have you been able to write, since your writer's block? And if so, like, what's keeping you writing?
Well, I'm not going to go to therapy. So I just I need to write. I need to work this out somehow.
I love that answer.
I'm a much better human being when I have gotten up in the morning and gotten my writing in. I am kinder to the people I encounter, and I am calmer, and I've just I've had that opportunity to work stuff out. And even if I never publish anything ever again, I think I still need to get up every morning and write, because I am not the best version of myself if I don't do that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a good answer. And you are going to get published again. I don't even talk like that. You are so good, you know?
And then you'll have to come back and chat with us again. This was great.
I would love to come back and chat with you anytime about your writing.
Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll come back to talk about our writing. You come back and talk about your writing.
Yeah, you are going to be the one writing. Oh, but we have to give Charlotte's socials, or anywhere people can find you.
So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CS Malerich. You can also just type in csmalerich.com and you will reach my website. You can contact me through there as well.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.